recognize one. So congratulations to Liz. And that, Madam Chair, is what I think.
Awesome, thank you. So, at this time, we are going to open our public hearing on the school budget. And to that end, anybody who has questions or comments, please just raise your hand and we will recognize you at any time. You don't have to wait to the end for anything like that. So, I'm going to hit it. Zach, Dr. B, the budget presentation.
Yeah, so I think, Kevin, we got this on.
There we go. So this is, I appreciate everybody being here. It's your opportunity to ask questions, to get clarification. But I think one of the more important things is to always remember, like Pentucket is Groveland, West Newbury, and Merrimack. So you are us and we are you. There is no, I know we look at ourselves as separate entities, but that is not the way we all function. So we are each other. It's just one of those symbiotic relationships that we have. So happy to stand. I think I prefer to stand, so we'll go ahead and do that. So you all know this movie. If you don't have the TV on anytime around the end of January, start of February, but Groundhog Day. This is my 7th time presenting this. I feel like I'm repeating myself every single year. I'm working on that feedback. So, you know, when we go through this, I don't think there's going to be, if you've been on your boards for a period of time, some of this stuff is going to be like, you kidding me, this is what it is again. Yes, this is what it is again. And I'm even going to take you back into history a little bit to see what had happened in the past. So where we are right now in the budget process, tonight, that's the public hearing. You ask questions, make suggestions, recommendations, all of that happens. So this is your opportunity to go ahead and find out what's going on, why we made certain decisions, why we decided on level services. March 4th, that's next Tuesday. That's when the school committee is set to vote a budget number. So tonight's meeting exists so that they can take into account all of your information. Now that is, I do not vote on that. Suzanne does not vote on that. That is the school committee. So tonight's meeting, when it's a public hearing, you're going to want to talk to the school committee members. We're here to answer questions, but ultimately they're the ones who are going to vote the budget number that will trigger all the next steps, which March 5th through March 7th, that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that's when the business office goes through, figures out, okay, here's what the assessment is going to be for each town. And then following that, the boards of selectmen decide, okay, well, is that something we can do within our budget, or is that something that's going to have to be an override? So that's those parts of the process. April 28th, as you know, that's all of our annual town meetings, and at that meeting, that's when the budget and all other budgets go and get put forth there. If there were an override, that's where the question comes up of whether or not we were going to have the override put on the ballot. And then if there was an override, May 5th would be the date where that override would appear on the ballot and be voted on. So those are our steps. So this is just a fact, you can see it there. The state's backing up. Last year, I think Triton was about 18% is what the state funded their budget. We are not, we're very similar. I think they're a little bit more, but they believe we're under 20% now. We'll know more after the actual numbers come in. So, because I'm bored and because I have Mr. Gilligan over at Page, this is a report from 1929. The annual report by Dr. Page. So in that annual report, he has 2 interesting quotes on one of the first pages. So what is keeping the tax rate up? Is it the schools? The answer is no. So yeah, it looks like it is, but as you know in your municipalities, we're not adding teachers, we're not adding programs. We stopped doing that a long time ago. It's been cut. Every year I've been here, with one exception. Does anybody know the one exception? Yeah, it's the override year. No, it was the override. In the override year, that's when we brought back 15 of the 20 positions we had cut the previous year. So there's no, it's all the outside factors that are causing our budget to go where it's going. And then, of course, the entertaining one, again, 95 years ago this is. Dr. Page, the state system of reimbursement accounts of schools is a complicated one. Yeah. Because some of you have tried to decipher the foundation budget, chapter 70, and it still is confusing. So when we look back in the past is what's happened. You can see in fiscal year 23, we had a $1.34 million shortfall. The override failed. We cut 20 full-time employees. We increased before and after school, we doubled all athletic fees, and we moved the cap. So that's how we balanced our budget that year. Again, that's 20 FTEs. I think you all can appreciate that number. Next year, $2.1 million shortfall. But we had the override that passed. And when that override passed, that's when we brought back 15 of those. So we're still 5 shy. Last year was a $2 million shortfall. We cut 12 and a half full-time employees. And the school committee, the reason why we only cut 12 and a half is because the school committee used $500,000 of its E&D to help offset that deficit. So we didn't have to make cuts as deep. This year, $2.3 million. And our budget is just based on level services. I know I've covered this before. Again, it's Groundhog Day. Level services, all that means, the budget book is based on what we have right now is what we're trying to fund for next year as well. That's level services. We're not adding new people. We're not adding new services. Sometimes you are forced to add new people. Special education, some student comes in, has special need, you have to provide that service. You're legally required to. So that's where we are in the past. So the budget drivers, historical look at the budget drivers. Again, all Groundhog Day, fiscal year 23. Transportation costs went up $583,000. 6 special education positions, the override failed. Increased the before and after school, all the things I said before. Fiscal year 24, we were still at held harmless. You remember that $30. And the wonderful thing they did to us that year, OSD. OSD again is a state organization. So the state sanctions them to set tuition rates for out-of-district special education placements. That was the year they increased it by 14%. Nobody in education had a say in this. That's entirely OSD. Health insurance went up 8 to 10% for employees, depends on what plan you we're on, and inflation was at 9.1%. And all those numbers, I think I had a slide, might have it in here again, you can only tax up to 2.5% without an override. So when you have numbers that big, it doesn't work. Fiscal year 25, last year insurance was at 11%. We had a loss of nearly $300,000 in regional transportation funds. Collaborative tuition went up to $279,000. Essex Regional Retirement went up $139,000. But we did save over $500,000 in private tuition that year. And sometimes that happens because we have students age out of residentials. And that's the case this year. We have students aging out. So it should have been almost a $500,000 savings. But we are having another student who's come in that's going to cost us $500,000. So that 2.3 shouldn't be 2.3, or it's not what it should not be. 2.3 didn't have to be 2.3, it could have been 1.8. Much more manageable. But again, that first year, a student comes in residential, that's $500,000, $400 to $500,000. We have to pay that up front. There is no circuit breaker that covers that. There is in year 2, not in year 1. And again, fiscal year 26, the amount we need after the governor came up with her budget is $2.3 million. I don't have this anywhere in the presentation, so I'll just tell you this. Somehow, we are in much better shape than most districts in Massachusetts at only $2.3 million. Now, our ability to come up with 2.3 is not as great as other communities. That number, of everyone I've heard, with the exception of Newburyport, is better than anyone else's. So that should tell you something a little about the state of funding in Massachusetts, where that money's going. And I'm not talking about the urban districts, because the urban districts, I do not think we're going to have this problem at all. But any smaller districts or medium-sized school districts, we somehow are in better shape. It's just unusual. So, it's Groundhog Day, so I decided I'm going to pull some of the Hall of Fame slides from past years because they still apply. Fiscal year 23, so this was a presentation that was done 3 years ago. State's contribution that we had a need of $1.4 million. So what did the state give towards that $1.4 million? $69,750. It's great. So that represented of our need, less than 5% of what we needed is what the state gave us that year. And again, that was 3 years ago. So this goes into the whole thing. This is why the conversation is just the same conversation. It's been happening for 10 years. 10 years it's been happening, and if you keep on going down there, so you have a shortfall. If the towns gave us $750,000, we'd still have a shortfall of $585,000. So what's happened over the last 10 years, this is again 3 years ago, so we can say what's happened over the last 13 years is we just cut personnel and we cut programs. What we were fortunate to up until about 3 years ago was that school choice. We still have a lot of school choice students. Those choice students have left. So population has dropped down. So as we're cutting people, it's okay. But that stopped happening. Our last school choice, I think we have 3 school choice kids in 12th grade. This is our last group of school choice kids. So all the positions that could have been cut stopped. That stopped about 3 years ago. So we're going now to fiscal year 24. So this is from a presentation 2 years ago. There you go. Like this is reds and greens. So the things that are expensive and the things that we get money for. This again, 2 years ago, inflation was way over 2.5%. You had your utilities, which are going to be cut, OSD, but we did get 0.51% from the state for that increase, and most you can test 2.5. So again, it's just a simple question. When the red is greater than the green, we all understand what that outcome is. Also from 24, there's a reason why I put this here. I want to talk a little bit about Project 211. So this was again 2 years ago. That is what places around us got on the left for Chapter 70, and that's what the 11 wealthiest districts in Massachusetts got on the right. You'll remember that slide if you were here. It's horrifying, it's gross. It has to do with the foundation formula, and because they can fund a tremendous amount, they get like a bonus. So they get that. We don't have the means or have not done that, so we do not get that bonus. Brookline, and this is a good thing. Bad for them, good for us. Project 211 is started by the Mass Association of Regional Schools. So all the regional schools, it's our organization. So there are 200, they started Project 211, which is the number 211. Those are the number of districts that are held harmless. That has increased to 232 this year. So 21 more districts this year are now held harmless. That means they get the minimum aid. It was 30. The governor in her budget put $75 per student, which is good. It's better than the 30. Remember, $30 got us to 65,000, so 75 will get us, 180, 200,000, which is good. Brookline is now in the held harmless category. The reason why that's good is because Brookline has great influence. Like they're right outside of Boston. They have a big population. They have more representation than we have in the House. So when this comes up, and you all should know or would know, Chapter 70 is on the radar of every person in the Senate right now. Senator Spilka, who's the president of the state Senate, she oversees the districts, she oversees the communities that make up North Middlesex. They're having to close 2 schools. And that is not going over well at all, because they don't have the funding to keep the schools open. North Andover, they're much closer to us, also looking to close an elementary school. So things we don't want, situations we don't want to be in, we're there. But you can see if they're at their 1.33, that might mean that Wellesley's probably not far off as well. But we'll see. And this is just another chart to remind what Massachusetts has been giving to our operational budget. Like what's their contribution then? And again, this is 2 years ago. But if I added last year and the year before, it's worse. They're both red. So since fiscal year 11, in this case now 15 years ago, they've dropped us 10.5% is what they're contributing, negative 10.5% is what they're contributing to our operational budget. And you all understand why. I've sat in a lot of meetings and outside organizations that are not the politicians have said, referred to us, not just Pentucket, not just Groveland, West Newbury, Merrimack, but anyone who's held harmless as the wealthy towns and wealthy schools. And those who are not are gateway communities. So it's like one or the other. And we all know black and white is not how the world works. There's a whole spectrum of, yep, you have extraordinary wealth, you have extraordinary poverty, and there's everything in between. But that's the way the formula works. So how do you feel about this? That was a question. Because this was a point I made, and a couple of our representatives were right to say to me, Justin, that's not necessarily true. So I put no change, no change, no change. They're right, but I'm more right than they are. It's not necessarily true, because they did try ways to help offset and increase circuit breaker refunding to let us use special education transportation as part of circuit breaker. So they tried to do some things. But I'm right, because the problem has not been solved. It's not even close. Like small little things like that help, certainly, but so too does an increasing the health harmless from $30 to $75. It doesn't solve the problem at all, not even close. But it helps. So everything that's happening, and what I said earlier about those school districts and how we're in pretty good shape, the crazy thing about this, and because most of you have been here, how long have we been saying this? It was my first or second year, I was talking with Dr. Jarvis, who was running special education. I said, there's no way this is sustainable. We started having meetings that year with Senator DiZoglio, with Senator Tarr, with Representative Mira, just about, hey, what's going on? This has to be fixed. But until it impacts their communities, doesn't seem like much happens. And I know Senator Tarr, who was here last night, as Madam Chair had mentioned, and he was one of the first people to sponsor that review of the Chapter 70. And what he said is true. You will hear and talk to whoever your representatives are, we know who our representatives are. They, oh yeah, well, Chapter 7, we're going to support that review. Great. That's not going to happen next year. That's not going to be in place the year after. It will take 3 years, maybe 4, for that to get corrected. So during that time, we've got to figure out how do we navigate? How do we make this work? And last year we talked, I put on this slide about what happens if we don't keep up with the rate of minimum local contribution. So when the state comes out, they have cherry sheets, all these sheets go to municipalities and they say, hey, Groveland, you need to increase yours by 6.89%, your minimum local contribution. Groveland already pays more than what they're required to pay. All 3 towns pay more than what they're required to pay. But the state wants to see that increase. We don't do that. And when we don't do that, they want more the next year, more the next year. And that's why it's a picture of there we are at the start line, and we're falling further and further behind. Now, I do not understand this 100%, so you could ask me, and I have to go and ask someone else, but I've had a conversation with another superintendent who knows this stuff very well, and he took his district, compared to our district, we're both regionals, and he said, if you look here, if they do make a correction in the foundation, Chapter 70, we are going to be okay. The state is still not going to look favorably on you because you are so far behind when they put in the minimum local contribution. So, we'll see. I mean, I think they should get rid of the whole thing. How are we perceived? It's a good question. So we're going to go over to a video. So this is Triton's, they're doing their budget at the same time. They're on almost the same time we are, but here's just a little public comment here. Yeah, please. Brian Ford, very
I think I'm good. Well, I think it's live. Okay, so this is a little late in your budget process, but I think it's fairly critical to kind of take a look at what other districts are doing. This last weekend, because of the snow, I got a chance to troll through the Pentucket budget, and their budget is significantly actually in decline in terms of year-over-year basis. So they actually have reduced their staff count by 21 and a bit full-time equivalents. It's down from 373.3 down to 351.6. So they have taken a hard look at what they're doing. So part of the problem that I think many institutions have is level effort budgeting essentially leaves everything in place. And you just assume that everything is going to work, and then you just increment it up. Zero-based budgeting, for those who've taken MBA courses, recognize that that's not the way to really run a business in times when resources are being constrained. Now, I know that Pentucket has a different kind of financial structure than Triton, because we've been through this before. I've been around these meetings for quite a few years now. So I understand that in terms of dollar amounts, but not in terms of headcount. Headcount is a different issue. Pentucket has basically the same number of students that Triton has. It is doing it with a much leaner staff. So the second page of the handout basically shows, this is the latest data that's on the DESI website. So I apologize for it not being up to date, but that's the latest. And you can see that for teachers and paraprofessionals, Triton has more staff than does Pentucket. So I'm conscious of my time. So the last point I would make is, we already know what next year's budget is more or less going to be, because most of the budget is predetermined by basically staff. And we know what the budget is going to be, the increases are going to be for next year based on the contracts that we've got. So if we're in, and Rowley is in trouble this year, we're going to be in more trouble next year. So the time to kind of take a hard look at your numbers, the staffing numbers,
Just noting that's 3 minutes.
is now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, a couple things on that. One, I don't like to hear that we are in economic decline. I don't think we're in economic decline. I think we've just taxed the heck out of our homeowners, and how much more can they take? That's what I think. The other part of this is, but school is not a business. We don't deal with widgets. So next year's budget is not predictable. We have a student who's going to cost us $450,000 next year. That wasn't predictable. We didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that this year we were going to have to budget 12% for health insurance. Didn't know any of that. And if you think staff is a huge part of our staff, of course, is going to be a huge part. But if you think that's 95%, you're nuts. Take a look at special education transportation, regular bus transportation. It's extraordinary. Those numbers are huge. But, points made, right? Even a member of the public and another school committee member is looking at us going, hey, they're slashing left and right. So I don't know how we all feel about that. Because at some point, it will come back and bite us. So our budget this year, how are we stacking up against everybody else? Well, you can see it right here. We spent $2,100 less than the state average. We are 10.26 below the Essex County average, which is good. It's easier to see here. So those are all the schools. That's Essex County. And you can see out of the 20, we ranked 16th. Now, of the regional schools, it's not a good position for us to be in. So if you're Peabody, Methuen, like they don't always have included in their budget, so it depends on how they calculate per pupil expenditure, but health insurance and all those costs and things like that, they don't have to worry about those. We, of course, do. But we're ranked 16th out of the 20. And there you can see Hamilton, Wenham, Whittier, Triton, Amesbury, Ipswich, Newburyport. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Gloucester sometimes is in the Cal. Linfield's at 13, Georgetown ahead of us at 15, and then here we are at 16. Also, just a little, people always think North Andover is extraordinarily wealthy. They have the lowest per pupil expenditure, and every single year they run up debt because they can't afford to do all the things that they have happening when special education numbers come flying in. They have to try to figure it out. But again, it's a data point. So the governor's budget this year, so the regional transportation went up this year, which is good. It's at 80%. I've heard it might go up as high as 95%, which would be great. That would be a huge chunk of money. The health harmless, instead of being $30 a student, $75 a student. Again, okay, that's good. It's not bad. It's not bad if the number's bigger, but the size of that number is not going to be a huge impact. So definitely, this is a better start than where we were last year. The one thing I think you all understand, so up online is the budget book. And if you go on underneath the school committee, and then you can click on the budget, you will see, well, wait, we have to refresh this. So there's the budget book. The budget book's there. That budget book is not going to change as we move through the budget process. And I think you all understand, even after the school committee, they vote a budget number. You're waiting for the House's budget, the Senate's budget, and then the agreed upon budget, and how that impacts us, we don't know. I don't even think, we have an idea, the 12% of health insurance, we haven't gotten the definitive numbers for the health insurance yet. We have a contract out for bus, for transportation. We don't know what that is, but we're going to have that contract out. We don't know what that number is. So we're working with a lot of unknowns. What we know, what I know, is that I need to have as good as possible an idea by the start of May, so I can start working with the teachers union to say, look, here's where we are, here's the positions. I said this to the school committee at the last meeting. I do not see a road, unless there's an override and everything gets funded, I do not see a pathway where we are not, again, cutting full-time employees. Again, if we haven't already passed the critical mass, we are about to pass that point where, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's not far away. And it's not gloom and doom, it's just a reality. If you're in a classroom teaching, you can handle so many kids, and you can put 30 kids in the kindergarten class. There's consequences for that. I think you all have heard me talk more than enough on that. So, we're not adding any new recommendations, just level services. So I'll take exception as well. Zero-based budget, sure. I don't have a master's in business, but I don't understand what zero-based budget is. I can do that all day long. We can start from the ground, build it all up, see what we need. I have this conversation a lot with our administrators. I don't care what exists right now. I care about what we need. There's needs, wants, and things we don't need. What do we need? That's where we start. And we start looking at what do the kids, what are they not interested in? So if we have always provided this program and nobody's in that program anymore, we don't need it anymore. Kids are doing something else. That's where we need to do it. I'll tell you a good example. The excitement that you see at a lot of the elementary schools about whether it's Lion King Jr. or whatever play that the kids are doing at the elementary level, there's like 100 kids that are participating in that. And now they get here, and we've started growing that theater program. It's huge. That's where the kids are wanting to go, which is great because we have this great auditorium, which when functional is the kids love their parents love it. Great viewing, great seating, great sound. So that program is going to explode, and that's where you need to put the people because that's the need, that's the want. The robotics we just saw here, that program is in the process of exploding. We started in one grade level. Once we start bringing it down, that will explode. So you just don't keep something for the sake of keeping something. I understand some places just do that, whether it's a municipality or whether it's a school district. Like they keep it just because it's always been, but that's not how we operate. Level services, though, is how this budget was created. Our drivers, here they are right here. Health insurance, 12.5% is what is projected out for active members and 10% for retirees, so that's an increase of $686,000. That number, by the way, is pretty good. Pretty good. I've heard two other districts, 27%, that would wreck us. Absolutely wreck us. Problem with this is like I think the third consecutive year we've been in double digits. Residential placement, that just is. So I put down there, it's a break even, because we have two students who are leaving. A school district, a public school, only educates someone up to the age of 22 or until they get a diploma. So once they hit 22, the state takes over. So we had two students who turned 22. So again, that would have been about $500,000 that we would have saved, but we have a student going to residential, so that's gonna cancel it out. Special ed transportation up $272,000, charter school tuition. I would love to get into this in more detail. $272,000 going from Pentucket to charter schools. We are getting we're getting $75 per student in the governor's budget. Go ahead and divide that number there by 75, and I promise you, we don't even have nearly that many students going to charter schools from Pentucket. So how they come up with, hey, from Pentucket, you should only get this much, but everybody in the state, you get this much for charter school. It is an odd approach, but that's the way they do it. School choice tuition, same type of thing. That's students who leave. I know we have one student in particular that I think is about 80,000 of that. Special education reserve, that we have to have, right? Because if you don't have that and you have needs in terms of transportation, you have to add something. There's no other place to get it from. Essex Regional Retirement, 83,000, and the transportation renewal, we put that at 3.5%. We don't know, that 3.5% is what we could have done with the current vendor. But based on research that we did, we're hoping that it comes in well below that. So, since 2016, I know I met with town administrators, so I wanted to go through and just show this. So you have the Pentucket budget increase. Now, the one on the left-hand side includes all the capital. So even before this building, you were all paying for the green repairs, the boilers, and I think a roof repair of the junior high, middle school. So you already had stuff you were paying for. So I went on the left, that's all included. All of that's included. You can see the percent of budget increase from year to year. Now on the right, there's a little bit of a key, and I'll walk you through that. You can see those two greens, 2020 and 2021. Those two greens, so you have 2023 where the budget failed. That was the failed override in 2023. 2024 is when the override passed, so you go up 5.97, so if you take it out, so 6%, 2.17, those two greens right there, that is where you start to have the building project. So when Greg LeBrecq and I are sitting down doing this, we're like, okay, we're gonna go, we need the building, do the building, just do the building, that's all we need to do. So obviously we took a hit on personnel to make sure that the override was going to be at the greatest success possible passing. So that's what you see in those two spots. The italicized in 25, fiscal year 25, is because that has not been confirmed. We're still in that fiscal year, so we need time for it to pass through before it can be approved. But overall, last year, if you look at it with the capital, our budget went up 1.04%. If you take the capital up, our budget went up 1.19%. I don't know what stuff went up in your towns, but it went up a hell of a lot more here than 1.19%. So predictably, if you do that, and you see no place on this, on any percentage, where there's a 1%, and then it goes to 1% again, because you can't, or you can, but that has consequences. So, where does that leave everything for us right now? Level services, $2.3 million. If the towns gave, it included the capital, the average of the capital, that'd be the town saying, okay, $1,035,000. If you exclude the capital, that'd be $1.2 million. So, in both of those instances, Pentucket has to cut. We have to reduce our budget. So we have to reduce it either by the $1 million, or we have to reduce it by $1.3 million. So if you want information, I already showed you the budget piece. So if you want to know more about the budget, if you want to go in, you all have access to the budget books. You can do that, but you can also just go to the school committee tab on prc.org, click on budget, and the fiscal year 25 budget's there. Now, if you want to see the past ones, then all you have to do is go onto there's a, Cat calls it a hamburger menu, it's like 3 lines. You click on that, click the business office, and budgets, and I think it goes all the way back to, I don't know, goes back a good long while. And you click on that and you can see all those budgets. Obviously, for us, that line, listen, if there's questions, ask. If there's concerns, state them. If there's ideas, put them out there. Like, again, you are us and we are you. So it's all the same. So that's all I've got. A little trip down memory lane, but again, not massively different from any year in the past. And we do have, we think we'll need a microphone, or can? Okay. If you need a microphone, let us know. If you think you can hear the people, all right, that's fine too.
And Suzanne's here as well. She said she'd like to hear me talk instead of her talk. This is public hearing, so anybody here or there? What?
Hi, I'm the select board in Berlin, Kathy Castanella. I know, and you know, that we meet with our town administrators, finance director, managers, whatever the title is, on a monthly basis. Right, so I think you, at least the business office, is already familiar with the funding available in the towns. I'm just wondering how familiar is the school committee members with how town funding works and how much available funding is there in your town global? Are the school committee members, do you update them on all this, or do you wait for this hearing for them to hear from us?
So it depends, if it's budget time, that's why if you go back to this slide's not picked on accident. These numbers aren't picked on accident. If it was uninformed, they would say, oh, okay, we need $2.3 million to submit. I think they're more than aware of some of the constraints. I honestly, I don't know how many you have. I have no idea.
Really?
I
That's so funny.
I know.
Okay, so let's put it simply. We, our town administrator, keeps us informed, and we are aware that she's brought to you a number of 3% that we could free up, which is more than the 2.5%. So that's giving the school as much as we feel that we can without having very, very detrimental impacts to our town services. Last year, we do not pay any stipends for our volunteer boards anymore. We don't have any money to do that. I don't think there's any plan to bring that forward in the future. So all of our volunteers are volunteers. They get no payment, which is unfortunate because most towns do give their volunteers a stipend for their services. But we don't. We cut all of that to balance the budget and afford to keep the school budget going. This is what we've done. We're a skeleton crew when you look at how many positions we have in the town. Our highway department is like 4 individuals, and then some seasonal people. So it's not like we have ability to go beyond that 3%. So if we were to try to come up with the funding for our full assessment as shown, I think we're short about $540,000. So where would $540,000 come from in the town of Groveland and the amount of money that we have that's discretionary? We have a $22 million budget, right? $23 million budget. 65% of that is tied up with our schools, supporting our schools, which we're glad to do. We want to have a good school system. But we don't have that kind of discretionary money without catastrophic impacts on services to our residents. So we have a $23 million budget, we have a $53 million budget. So I feel like at a juncture like this where we're both coming from the same side of the fence, we're both facing the same problems. We have the same difficulties that you have. The state funding is inadequate for our town. We get as many grants as we can to fix roads. We don't really put that much money towards fixing roads because we don't have the funding to do that. So we wait for grants to fall in our lap. We get grants to do studies. We get grants to fix sidewalks. We get grants to get grants, I think, sometimes. But suffice it to say that a good percentage of our people that are heads of departments are always looking out for grants, always looking out for grants. And we're not adding personnel. We lost personnel. We're trying to hold on to the bare minimum that it would take to keep our town operating fairly. So, you know, unfortunately and sadly, we don't have that $540,000. We just don't have it. So it would have to be an override decision, and it's not really even a decision, because if you present us with that budget that's, that's right before us tonight, our only decision is that it has to go to an override, because if we don't send it to an override, it's approved, and we don't have any money to pay it. So it's not a decision that we make, okay? It's just the same problems that you're facing, and I wish that we had more time and all that to do more outside the box thinking. I know you, the school committee members, you work really hard at what you do. I mean, I served on the school committee for a while. It's a lot of work. And I'm grateful for it because I don't have the time to do that right now. But both sides are going to have to find a way to make ends meet unless you want to risk sending this to the override. You know, that's where it is for Groveland. And when I say risk, it's not because I'm going to say to people, don't vote for this because it doesn't matter. All right? But you talk about having a structural deficit that keeps coming back. And I just feel like, okay, what can we do? I know in Groveland, we're working on trash, finding a way to move some of the trash outside the town budget. Because it's going up faster than our revenues. And I know your hands are tied in a lot of areas by laws or by things you have to do. I'm just trying to explain that we face exactly the same thing as you do. If this budget is presented to us, there's not really a decision, it just, we have to go to the override. And I just couldn't tell you how that would go. If you look at Groveland's history and overrides on all kinds of issues, it's not what I call an easy task in Groveland. Not saying we don't occasionally need one, but it's a difficult task, and so I like to say we don't approach it with a lot of confidence right now because we just passed a general override 2 years ago and a building override. And that's what everybody is talking about in the world.
Just a point of clarification. So, yes, Ms. Olden definitely, I know from her, but from Carol, 3% is what we can do. I just don't know. I've said that. I don't know roles. I don't know what the accounts are. I don't know what's in there for funding. I don't know what's free cash. I don't know any of those things. That's what I was getting at. I didn't know from the back. I certainly just wanted to clarify.
Right. No, we did certify free cash of more than last year, 1.2 million, and we're probably going to need to use that for capital. That's where we go because we don't have enough elsewhere for that. We try to save a little bit aside and use it for things that are not reoccurring, like the continued replacement of Bagnell of the asbestos tiles. We put money into the Bagnell building every year. We put some money into our own town buildings. We do what we can. We do what we can. We've written letters, we've signed letters with the other towns to the state. I feel like we're spitting in the wind there. But I don't know what else we can do to get them to understand the regional school district and the commitment they need to us for funding things like transportation, which they haven't done. Promises not kept.
Going in the wind, I think, is a very fair assessment. All done it, all had the conversations. I think the best we can do, I know that last year we had this meeting upstairs. At some point we started getting a little chippy. But I think we all do understand what your points are. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with, there is no magic well of money that's going to come from us from the three towns. For us, it's just a question of how do we make it work? Just like you said, trying to figure out the town, we're having to do the same thing, making decisions. And that's for us, are going to impact kids. That's
Right, I mean, they promised us a lot, and we did initially get additional funding in our early years of regionalization. And I'm just wondering why we don't seem to have any clout or power or anything to make a move on this.
I think it's just a numbers game. We do not have a representation. And I think I've said this a lot to the school committee, so I'll say it here as well. If you know you're in a bigger municipality, big municipality, pick a city. If you're in a city, you know you're getting big money coming in through different venues, through formula and through student opportunity, which follows the formula. If you're representing that municipality, you are not going to want anything to change. And you have the votes to make sure it doesn't happen. And the reason why you don't want it to change is just to make up numbers. We use close to ours. If I'm in that big city and my budget, my school budget was $50 million, I'm then supposed to get an additional $3 million of Student Opportunity Act funding. My budget next year is not going to be $53 million. It's going to be 50 and a half or 51. You might ask, well, what happened to the other $2 million? That's where the municipalities are able to take that and do a lot of the things you said. They take it to make repairs on buildings, to pay off contracts, to do all the things that they weren't able to do while they were funding schools. But they have the numbers, and we're small. And all the other regional schools are small. That's why Mars is such an important organization. That's why Project 211, which, by the way, is not just Mars. You have the American Federation of Teachers, the Mass Teachers Association, Mars, Mass Business have all signed off and sent a letter to the governor saying, this is a big problem, you've got to start paying attention. But if you take the top 10 biggest cities in Massachusetts, in the House, do they just automatically have the power to say, I'm sorry, we're not doing that, we're just going to keep on going? Or do they understand our pain? I just don't know what they do.
Do you think that the other regional school districts feel that if a regional school district were treated like a municipality as far as determining the Chapter 78, but we might potentially get more Chapter 78? Because I took a look and it was just a really rough one. Because we're treated as if we're three separate entities, adding up to determine what our gap is. And that'd be like taking Haverhill and treating Bradford as one, you know what I mean? And then determining from that. I don't feel like that was written into the formula at all. I think that's something that someone, somewhere decided this is how we're going to do it. Because all their boilerplates, all their slides that show you how they're going to do it are presented as a single school district marching through. And yes, so I mean, if potentially almost all the regional districts would benefit from having, they do the foundation budget as a region. Why not do the rest as a region?
I think it just comes back to, one, I don't know that the numbers, if it's not going to favor me in an urban district, then I don't want that to happen. But the second part of it, I think, is also, if you all the Roger Hatch helped create that formula. It's an incredibly complicated formula that has not been changed, I think, in 30 years, 20 years, it's a long time, it's not been changed.
Right.
So it's still functioning as though it was good for the late 90s and early 2000s. Of course, so much has changed. I don't think if you take that to a politician, they can't explain it. They cannot explain the details of how this all works. It's just a formula, that's what they use, they put it in there. So we need the Senate to get this started, really what it is. In my opinion.
So you feel that the 211 will get the Senate to do this?
I think the president of the Senate, she has already made it clear that addressing the Chapter 74 is one of her 3 major priorities for this year, 2025. So there's movement, but even if there's movement on it, still, it'll take time. So I think for us as a school district, I take the position that we just need to try to survive until it gets fixed, which is not a place we want to be in. But on the flip side, I also recognize, like I said earlier, where we are is not nearly as bad as where most places are, which is shocking to me. Shocking. I think it's just because we've cut so much and other places have not. And I knew within the first 2 years how bad this was going to end up being, so you try to plan for it. And it's, for us, the school committee is well aware, like they're going to have to make decisions. We're going to have conversations. We're going to start something later on tonight about what do you want to do if we have to make reductions. And almost every single one of these things we want to do, parents are not going to be happy about it. We're just trying to start.
Thank you.
So I just want to chime in from the top of our map, because we're in a very similar situation as Groveland, right? Our budget is right around $22 million, right? So if you just said, you took that $22 million and you just did 2.5%, we've looked at that a number of times, you're talking about $450,000, something along those lines. If you just took a look at the health insurance increase, that basically just ate all of the entire increase before we've done anything else. These uncontrollable healthcare costs are killing us. They're killing us from a municipality standpoint, they're killing us from a school standpoint, and at some point, right, along with those conversations, the letter that you brought up, that was different, right? We've been talking, we all know this, right? We talk to our senators and our representatives, but to have the unions, join with Mars and some of these other groups, that was different. I think at this point, there's enough noise now where I think people are perking up and saying, the way this is going is completely unsustainable, and we need to make changes. But I think, Justin, I don't know if it's feedback that you've received or it is what you're thinking is going to take for time. Probably 3 to 5 years is what we're looking for.
Yep.
Right? It's not going to happen overnight. So unfortunately, these discussions, which if you read that letter that was sent by all the unions and Mars and those folks, it's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 5 years. Right? It's all the same stuff. It's regional transportation, it's special education, right? It's the fact that we only get $30 a student, right? That doesn't get us anything, right? So hopefully at that point, with that amount of leverage that you are now seeing, I mean, the MTA being a part of it, that's massive, right? Because exactly to what Dr. Butler was saying earlier is teachers are getting hurt, right? There's no funding, right? So at that point, they're either being cut or they're asked to be taken less or raise than what inflation is. So all these folks are losing at this point, and now everyone's saying, okay, we have to raise our hand and we have to get something done. So hopefully, right, we're on the track there, but in the meanwhile, we have to continue working together to figure out what we're going to do. Because to what you were talking about earlier, Kathy, like what can we do to stay out of override? We're in a very similar situation, right? I mean, if we go anywhere above 3%, we're going to be in an override situation, and that's with level services for the town, right? There's things that we need to invest in, that's going to be related to the Council on Aging or police or fire, all these things that we have to do, which is an incredibly difficult budget situation. So I just ask the school committee to take that under consideration. Obviously, if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out. We obviously want this to be collaborative because, frankly, it's the only way we're going to get through the next 3 to 5 years and hopefully there's a solution that's going to make school funding more sustainable.
I'm Ruth Rivard, I'm on the Groveland Finance Committee. I just wanted to clarify something from the last slide that had it referenced a 1% increase in the budget year over year for this current fiscal year, the 1.04 or the 1.09. That's obviously the total budget, that's an average percentage increase. I know that to the town of Groveland, I recall from last year's budget exercises that our increase was more than 1%.
Yes, that's
Because last year we had a lot of cuts throughout our budget in order to make that commitment to the school, our school allocation. So the 1% being a broad number just for the school committee and for anyone else, if there's anyone that wants to have further information, our cut was higher than that, and that's what we're struggling to meet for this year as well. When we can increase taxes by 2.5%, and we're giving the school, which is 65% of our budget, a 3% increase, that's an incredible amount of money for our town to come up with, and it really does impact other sources. And 1% is very different than 3% to us, so.
And I just want to add on to that, because Merrimack was a very similar spot, right? Our increase was 4.2%.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was.
Yeah, so we were over 4%, and the reason why we're at 1% there is we actually got cut from the state, right? So we actually got less funding year over year from the state. We take the Chapter 70, but then the regional transportation cut that Dr. Martin talked to earlier, we actually received less funding from the state. So while we're contributing 4%, you guys are doing 3.5% or whatever, and West Newbury's doing whatever they're doing, the state said, sorry, you're negative 2%.
So that's why the 1%.
I believe there was a slide in one of the two past presentations where it said the actual contribution from the state is negative by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So that really, so if the state contribution is negative, making that annual contribution appear as 1%, it's kind of deceiving as to what the towns are actually contributing in a
So,
year.
right, it's not, so just to be clear, this is not an annual contribution, this is just, we went from 45 million
Yeah,
zero to 45.6, that's a 1.19% increase in our operation budget, and that's what we
Yeah.
were working with,
Yeah.
which is why we made those cuts. And the same on the other side. I think you all understand, if everyone gives 3%, to us, it's not going to be 3%, it's going to be much less than 3%. It'll probably be close to, yes, ballparking 1.4, 1.5, somewhere around there.
The table on the right, is that column 2025, is that approved budget or is that expended budget?
So in 2016 up through 2023, that's all actual. That's what actually was, the budget was. So if you look at the budget books, the numbers there will be different. From 2016 to 2023, those are all the actual, 2024 is actual. That's the actual numbers. So that's what was, that was what was approved, or that's what we actually ended up spending.
2025 approved.
2025, yes, that 45.6 number is what's approved, but we do not, obviously, we're still in the fiscal year, so we don't have that actual results. Keep looking at it.
What is there, what tends to be the percent underspent when you're looking at the total bottom line? As you close the fiscal year, obviously it's going to vary year to year, but is there like a range?
So that will have to be an
I think that you did spend more in 24 than had happened in previous years. 24 was my first year. In previous years, it was around $1 million, but this in 24 it was cut down to the gap was only about $250,000. So we spent more.
I think this year might be somewhat similar as well, because in the summertime, there wasn't much we had to add teachers. We had third grade over in Merrimack.
Because of more students.
Because of more students, yes, sorry. There was a freak situation where in Merrimack, we had 8 additional students go to Merrimack. It wasn't transferred in from Groveland, or it was moved in, so 8 new kids there. And then at now kindergarten, we had to add a kindergarten teacher because in June, their number shot all the way up to 68, and we only had 3 teachers. And you could reasonably anticipate that from the rest of June, July, August, until they start, we're going to have an additional 5 to 10 kids come in, so you would have had to have 4 teachers. So we had to add those to that. But in and of itself, is about, be about $150,000. Not the teachers are not making $75,000 start, but you take that into insurance considerations, about $150,000. And that's absent of any special education cost.
I think to Angus's question, there is a page in here that shows surpluses and deficits, and a few years back you were running surpluses where revenues were over the budgeted amount, and that's kind of dissipated over the past couple of years. But so there was a history of having revenues exceed expenses for a while, but that seems to have probably dried up, and I imagine that's dried up because you've gotten tied up on both revenues and expenses. Do you have a chart that shows from 16 to 25 number of students?
Say it again.
The number of students, the chart that shows from 2016 to 2025, the number of students, how much it's decreased?
Oh, sure. I don't have that right in front of me. I can tell you over the last 6 years, we're slightly up. We've had a slight increase, but up until that point, it was a decrease. So if you go all the way back to, I want to say 2000, if you go from 2000, 2020, we probably around 200 students. And then since that point, we've plateaued, and some slight bump up. If you look at the elementary levels, up through, so if you look at kindergarten through 8th grade, those numbers are much higher than what we have in 9, 10, 11, 12 right now. So there'll be a little bump, but I've heard this on social media, which is always the best place to attack. The advertising. Facebook is a great place. But yes, we're going to have, numbers will go up in the high school in particular the next 40 years. There is literally 0% chance that we are going to have a space issue in this building in your lifetime. It is not going to happen unless for some reason we merge with another community and we want to have their kids in here as well. I very much enjoyed that comment. The schools do so often that's very concerned. But yeah, there was a pretty significant decrease. When you stop school choice, which was 13 years ago, and you go up to about 5 years ago, an 8-year period, it's a precipitous drop. We had about 200 students. We had classes that were over 200, and I think this year's class will graduate about 165. The grades that are below are actually about 175 to 185. That's so that's part of also why I talk about, when we were losing kids, it was okay. Lose kids and lose teachers, we understand that concept. But now, when we've balanced out over the last 5 years, we have a slight blip up. And I say slight, I think last year, over the course, we were a delta of like 6 kids. This past year, I think we've gone up a little bit more. But we plateaued, so it's gone, and now we plateaued. So we've cut. But if we keep on the trajectory, which we are in, now you're undercutting what you have to have in order to service the schools.
And now we're not just talking about the, elementary, trying to keep the elementary class sizes, like, we cut so many people at the secondary that those, when these guys see it, I hear about it from my freshmen all the time, like there's so many kids in those classes. And if you look, in the budget books, you'll see in section 3 where it shows the enrollment and by class size, and those are all pretty close in most of the grades at most of the schools, pretty close to our target for what is an appropriate class size at the various grade levels.
Yeah, and I know I've already gone through and done the enrollment projections for next year. If you look at elementaries in particular, you might remember there's a chart shows a mean, which means, okay, there's space. If it was clear, it's exactly right, or it's red, it's going to work. Almost all of our elementaries are red. West Newbury and Page is an exception. As
only have 2 teachers. You're gonna have 2 teachers per grade level, because they always have about just the right number of kids, 32 or 45, or, so they have 2 teachers per grade level. One of their grades is free, so most of their grades have space to add. But Bagnell and Sweetser Donahue, that's not the case. But the reality is, if we make further reductions, this is just the reality, at the elementary schools, then, you know, those target, I mean, way out the target, just won't be in red. I already next year, because of enrollments, you can see that already, it's supposed to be in red for those 3 schools. And that's gonna be our reality.
We really appreciate all of your feedback, any questions. I mean, it's not clear, we really understand that we're in the same, like, we are all in this position, as Dr. B said, like, this isn't you versus, like, we're all there. So we absolutely understand the positions that you, from the town, you know, perspective, are, you live there, and we get this. So we appreciate any feedback you have or will continue to have over the next week until we have to figure out what our number is and what to be. So this Gary, the timeline.
Are we done?
Anybody else? Anybody in the audience?
Come on.
And so, I think that,
I mean, nobody else, so seriously, does anybody else have anything they'd like to say?
Okay.
and just so, you are all more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you want to hear the intricacies of, I think we're going to be talking about the goals I have for this year and how we're progressing on those. We're going to be talking about, the middle high school is going to do a presentation. And then we do actually have something on, I think the last thing we have to do is looking at a survey that impact the school committee about if we have to make cuts or other things. There are all things we reasonably expect that exist and how they felt about just when we talk those through. But you do not have to stay. If you want to, please do. Certainly.